Hey guys, it's Tammy Dunnett here, your host of the Leadership Communications Expo, where I'm giving you access to industry leaders who are going to be sharing with you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies so that you can fully embrace the leader you are meant to be, master conflict resolution, and create engaging, inclusive teams. With me here today is K Whitehead, an executive and leadership coach working with senior and emerging leaders. And today we're talking about mastering leadership. It's all about self-awareness first. Why soft skills and the importance of interpersonal communications. Welcome, K.
Thank you for having me, Tammy. It's great to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate you spending your time with us today. I know you're going to be giving us some great tips today to help those leaders really understand why self-awareness is the first thing to look at.
That's right. And you're right, full circle, because it is all, for me anyway, it is all about self-awareness, understanding yourself. I often say, how can we be expected to lead, or how can you expect to lead other people if you don't understand yourself? Like, what is your own tendencies in how you behave, how you communicate? Knowing that first. And so that's why my why, if you will, bringing in Simon Sinek's work here a little bit, my why is that I know that increased self-awareness leads to transformational change. In other words, if you need to make those changes, if you need to make those shifts, it starts with really, really, really knowing yourself.
That's powerful.
And for me, when I did my graduate work, my leadership work at Royal Roads University, they actually did put us through the ringer quite a bit just on that. Like, I remember my academic supervisor continually sending me away saying, nope, you're not there yet. You haven't got it yet. I don't think you're there yet, until it really nailed down like who you are as an individual and how you behave, how you communicate. And for me, that's definitely the first step.
Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that experience? Because, I envision you going there and saying, okay, I got it. This is who I am. This is what I know about myself. And then going, no. And you're like, I can't imagine the feelings and the frustrations and the curiosity going through your mind as you were continually going deeper and deeper. Can you walk us through a little bit of that?
Yeah, and it's really, in my mind, it's very, very clear, because I ended up with this huge mind map. So if people know what mind mapping it is, it's when you start with something in the center that you want to focus on, and then as your mind thinks of different things, you actually put that in a graphical sense. So you'll have a bubble over here connected to the centerpiece, and from that you have bubbles all over the place. And it's like why does this happen to me? Why do I act in this way? Well, let me give you a very, very personal experience. In one of my previous roles as a sales manager, I would be training other sales managers, and I remember distinctly one scenario where we were having one of those difficult conversations with one of the sales reps over their performance. And at the time I wasn't present enough to think about this, but at the time what I was doing was I was kind of making jokes, and the manager that I was training actually literally kicked me under the table. Like, what are you doing? This is supposed to be a serious conversation. So why, when I found myself in those difficult conversations, would I react that way? Would I try and make jokes? Would I make light of it? What was I trying to do to relieve that personal tension that was going inside of me? So to really dig down and learn about what was going on there was huge, was significant. And you mentioned one of the processes that I'm certified in, which is Trecom social style. That is a model that allows us to really focus on who I am, or who you are as an individual, and where your tendencies are to be in terms of your communication style and your behavior style. I'm not talking about personalities here. I'm talking about your behavioral style. Understanding that first and foremost. And so when I figured that out for myself, I figured, okay, that's why I did that. That's why I was doing that. It was to relieve that personal tension that I was feeling, and releasing that personal pressure. And then now that I understand that, so it goes back to knowing yourself, right? Once I understand that, now I can work on how to resolve that, how to solve that challenge. Yeah. So that when I'm in those situations again, I'm not doing the same thing. I'm not falling into those traps. Does that make sense?
For me, it absolutely makes sense. I do a lot of the same. I will crack jokes and try to make light intention. But I feel like you took us on a journey and you left us at the cliffhanger. Like you had this deep insight as to why you do it to release the pressure, but you didn't tell us the reason why. And I feel so curious to know, what did you really learn about yourself in that moment?
Well, Trecom social style, it's very similar to DISC. If those people that are watching this right now, listening to this, are familiar with DISC, it's very similar to DISC. In fact, I kind of call it DISC for dummies, not because we're stupid or anything like that, because it's a stripped down version and a very accessible version of DISC. So if you think of the DISCs in DISC, the social styles, the D is in my model is a driver. The I is an expressive, the S is an amiable, and the C is an analytical. That's how it's mapped in my model. And I am an I, or I'm an expressive. And one of the key drivers or the key need for an expressive is to be liked. Mm. It's to be liked. So I will do it. The further I am into that space, and by the way, I call them neighborhoods. It's where I live. It's where I feel the most comfortable. That it's to be liked. So I want those pats on the back, those way to goes, the personal recognition. Mm-hmm. A number of years ago, I did a workshop at York. I did a executive sales management program at York University. And a guy by the name of Joe Sheeran taught this class, and he used this model, and he used birds, and for the expressives he used a peacock. Because it's like, here I am, right? Exactly, here I am, right? And so that's the driver. It's the need to be liked. And so depending on how deep you are into that neighborhood, the more stronger it is.
I love the neighborhood vision. And it's funny because I use that sometimes in my own model to describe the 4 quadrants that I teach about conflict engagement styles. Yeah. But what I like about the neighborhood is people can visualize what they're most familiar with, what they're most comfortable with, those routes that they always take without even thinking about it. But that when they go to another neighborhood, how they have to physically put some conscious effort into that in order to be safe and to be connected and to get where they want to go. It's beautiful.
And the other piece to that, Tammy, is we have to leave our neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. There are times we are forced to leave our neighborhood. We can't stay in our neighborhood. And within those neighborhoods, there are streets too, right? So depending on how deeper into the neighborhood you are, but there are times you have to leave your neighborhood because you do have to go get milk. You do have to get bread. You do have to put gas in the car. Mm-hmm. But it's like, oh, I'm home. I'm comfortable. This is where I belong. Oh, yeah. This is my space.
Yeah. And we feel like we operate the best from that place, but there's actually some downsides to that when we don't step outside. So fascinating.
Yeah. So the ability to move and operate in those neighborhoods in the Trecom model is called versatility. So how versatile am I? How am I able to connect with those people in those neighborhoods? So knowing yourself is that first step. The second step is then recognizing other people and the neighborhoods that they live in. So do I recognize somebody who lives in that analytical space, or the C space, the C space? And then what do I need to work with that person? And often when I'm doing my workshops on this, I'll use the example of, as an expressive, when I come home from IKEA, I open the flat box and I just start putting stuff together. I did that at a workshop once, and somebody on the other side of the room literally screamed. Had a visceral reaction to it. Why? Because their neighborhood is the analytical space. What do they do when they come home with that box? They take all the bits and pieces out, they count them, make sure they're all there, they get the instructions out. Yes, I might have to take a back of a chair off and put it back on. Right? But now put those two styles together in the workplace.
Yeah, there can be a lot of tension between those two.
Right. So understanding where I am, and if I know that I'm going to be working with somebody who's in that neighborhood, what do I need to do? What are some of the things I need to do? I need to slow it down a little bit. Mm-hmm. I have to give them the space. I have to let them figure out some things. right? Rather than me wanting to go off and do it
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
have fun doing it.
It sounds almost like they need to tap into, so I'm anticipating your model similar to mine, that we know each neighborhood, we've been there, we're familiar with it, but we don't like to stay there, which is why we always come back to our home. But because I've been there and I've journeyed there and I've tried a few things out over there, I am familiar with that area enough that I can probably connect with them if I just shift. And so shifting isn't so hard when we can recognize that we can be that way in certain situations.
But that is a conscious thing.
Yes.
That's raising your awareness. And
Mm-hmm.
we're going back to the self-awareness piece. It's raising that awareness. I use, and I'm not sure where I heard it first. I know Marshall Goldsmith uses the term, and that is the platinum rule. Now, we all know what the golden rule is. The golden rule is we treat other people how we want to be treated. It's how we're indoctrinated in JK.
Mm-hmm.
You know, hey, little Johnny, why did you treat Tammy like that? Is that how you like to be treated?
Well,
Right?
no.
But I introduced the platinum rule. And the platinum rule says you treat people how they want to be treated. You treat people how they want to be treated, not how you want to be treated. So recognizing that this person's in that space, in, let's say, the analytical space, what do I need to do for that person? What do I need to provide for that person? And as a leader, recognizing where your team is and where they might be, and again, you're communicating them with what they need. So if you're dealing with an analytical, well, yes, they need information. They need time to process stuff. If you're talking to somebody who's in the D space, they just want the results, right? Just if you've got a 30-minute meeting planned with somebody in the D space, plan for 15 minutes, because after 15 minutes, they're on to something else. So recognizing those things. If you're working with somebody who is in the amiable space, the S in the DIS model, you know that for them, it's about relationships, it's about teams, it's about getting along. So be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So instead of that 30-minute plan, maybe 40, because you have to have some conversation to begin with and get to know
Exactly.
what's happening with kids.
That's what they want, right?
Yes.
That's what they need. So the key difference between my neighborhood and the amiable neighborhood, and I'm married to an amiable, is that for expresses, for myself, for the peacocks, we need that personal attention. It's all about them. For the amiable, it's about other people.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges with an amiable is they tend to acquiesce a lot. So if you have somebody you're working with who's an amiable, recognize you probably have to draw them out, and you probably have to get that deeper to what they really want to do and what they really want, because they'll go along with you because they don't want to rock the boat.
Well, and I was just going to say, would that personality preference, that home kind of feeling, be difficult to understand when they're actually experiencing conflict and tension? Because as a leader, they're the ones who are saying, yeah, this is great, I want to make sure we have harmony.
Yes, exactly. And I was working with a leader as a coach, a senior. He was a vice president of finance for a very, very large organization. And he was in that space. That's where he lived. That was his neighborhood. And that was one of his challenges, was having those difficult conversations with people. And, you know, he wanted everyone to get along. So what I try and do in my coaching practice, I try and get them to come up with some sort of icon or word or image that they can use. They can put themselves in that space when they have to have those conversations, when they have to move out of their neighborhood. What do they have? And he was a collector of ball caps, baseball caps, which I noticed in his office. And so he came up with this himself. He came up with the idea of putting on a cap with an L on it. Now the L didn't stand for loser. It stood for leadership. And as he put on this cap, he was saying to himself, my role requires me to.
Oh, love that. I hope people are listening or writing that down. I think that statement right there is going to be something that's transformative.
Yeah, my role requires me to do ... So he was able to put himself in that space and move himself out, right? And have those conversations. So it's all about, again, the self-awareness, knowing who you are, but then knowing who you're working with and who your team is. And how you tend to behave in those different situations is important. And often, you know, for your listeners out there, the people who are watching this, if you go home at the end of the day and you're just totally wiped out. I mean, you're rung through the ringer. If you reflect on that day, 9 times out of 10, it's because you've had to operate outside of your neighborhood. the energy it takes sometimes to do that. For me, the energy it takes for me to work in that analytical space.
Yeah. I had a vision, you were talking about the neighborhoods, but I actually in my mind took it one step further about how we adapt and have to, like, the platinum rule is treat people how they want to be treated. I had this image of me going into somebody's home, and how we act differently. We automatically shift how we act because we're in somebody's home and we're capable of that in the visiting sense. And it's almost like we're transferring that skill now into the workplace.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. And one of the reasons I love the neighborhood concept, and I make a big point of this in my workshops when I start talking about this model, is to make sure that people understand we're not putting you in a box.
Mm-hmm.
Just because this is where you may be in an assessment or whatever, this is maybe where you land, that doesn't mean in entirety who you are. We are humans. And our ability to move around into different neighborhoods or go to the neighbor's house, that ability is what makes us human. We're not just that, and which is a huge piece for people to get a hold of, because often people say, oh yeah, oh, this person this is how they are, this is how they act, this is how they always act. No, it is situational.
Yeah, those are dangerous words.
Yeah, so grabbing, again, understanding that, and then working on our personal versatility is a huge piece of that.
There's two things you mentioned I want to come back to. Well, one thing you mentioned, another one I thought of. The first one I want to talk about is, you mentioned, like, if you're fatigued at the end of the day, we know that you're working outside of your normal pattern. What are you seeing in terms of trends with COVID? I think there's we've talked about people fatigue now. We've been isolated for so long, and that fatigue is maybe setting in sooner. Have you seen that and experienced this?
I don't know. I think about what I would like to say about that, maybe this does fit, is that the separation that we've had in working from our homes and not being connected to people is the bigger piece. For example, I work with a lot of organizations that, yes, everyone went into isolation. And the piece that was missing was what I call the water cooler talk. The water cooler talk. I think that's where people are really missing. So COVID, we hear a lot about people doing what you and I are doing right now, using, this medium to have these meetings and these communications. To a point, okay, but you still need that personal interaction. We still need those personal contact. And what we're missing is that is that the cooler conversation. I was listening to a radio interview the other day, and the individual said something that I thought was very telling. And he said, one of the things they're noticing because of the separation is the lack of collaboration. And where that's showing up is in patents applications. During the Spanish influenza, apparently patent applications dropped, and they're seeing the same thing with this pandemic because of a lack of collaboration.
It's needed for creativity, it's needed for inspiration, it's needed for all that. Yeah.
Right, and which is a telling sign. So yeah, I think that's where it is. So people now look, with anticipation, looking about getting together, because you walk down the hall in the office and you stick your head in the guy's cubicle and say, hey, what about?
Yeah.
Some of the best conversations that I had in one of my roles was, we called them kitchen talks, because you go to the little kitchenette, you grab a coffee, you bump into somebody, and you stand there for 10-15 minutes, and some of the blue skying creative thinking that happened in that space was amazing. And that's what we really, really lost, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it kind of comes us back to the neighborhoods full circle, right? If you stay in your neighborhood, you're also missing that opportunity to learn and to uncover gaps maybe that you can't see without having had that conversation with somebody in another neighborhood.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Fascinating. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, so my son and I were talking about authenticity. There's all this talk about coming to work and being authentic. And my son said to me, he goes, Mom, nobody's authentic. And I was kind of like drinking the Kool-Aid of authenticity for a while, going, oh yeah, no, I want you to be authentic. And he's like, nobody's authentic. You shift with me, you shift with Dad. Like, we're always shifting. How does authenticity play into your coaching or your model?
That's a really, really good question, because I think, again, if it's internal, right? When I'm working with clients, often they'll start talking about this person in their office, that person in the office, and I'll say, well, let's bring this back to you.
Mhm.
How are you feeling about that situation, or what's happening to you in that situation? So to answer you, I think it's really about again, going back to really understanding yourself. I mean, who's to say somebody's being authentic or not being authentic? We talk. I was having this conversation with somebody the other day, and the scenario's not coming to me right now, but I remember saying to him at some point, how are you viewing that? Are you viewing it through your lens or their lens? Because he was something about another individual and how they were behaving, how they were acting. And I'm saying, whose lens are you viewing that through? Well, of course, he's looking at it through his lens. Well, do you know what's going on in that person's life? Do you know what's happening in that person's world? No. How can we know unless we ask, right? And then whatever. So I think we can only be true to understanding and true to ourselves and knowing ourselves. You know, the walking in our own shoes type thing. But again, looking through our own lens is how we see things. And often we get caught up in this cycle of wanting to impart how we're thinking onto other people. So often one of the things, I'll stop somebody and say, oh, I want to ask you a question as you're talking about this. Is this something you can control? Or is it something you can't control? Is this something, you know, because there are things we can control, there's things we can't control. So is this something we can control? So I think the authenticity is being authentic to yourself in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to what I told about the different neighborhoods, you know, if I know I'm going to be spending time with somebody in the analytical space, since we seem to be using that example a lot,
Sure.
I know I have to be ready for that, be prepared for that. So for me, bringing my authentic self to that is placing myself in the position that how I can best serve that person. Think about emotional intelligence, and I think of the 4 levels of emotional intelligence. And for me, I use the Sparrow and Knight version, which says the first step is knowing yourself, understanding yourself. And then it's controlling yourself, right? Like how you learn to tolerate other people's behavior without becoming tense. So, right? And that's recognizing where they are. So which is the third step, is knowing others, right? Observing people's behaviors, learn about their tension levels, and then do something for them. That's the 4th step. So know yourself, control yourself, know others, do something for others. That's the platinum rule. So talk about authentic. I know I'm being authentic if I'm doing that.
I love that.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, you know, I think that was a really beautiful way of tying in that authenticity doesn't mean you have to always stand in what you think is happening and what you think is real. It's about being authentic to your curious self. It's being authentic to your creative self. It's being authentic to your analytical self, and honoring those little pieces of you, but knowing it's going to take more work and effort to get into those spaces sometimes, and honoring that in yourself as well, I think, is maybe where authenticity needs to go in the workplace, is just saying, this is a lot of work for me. I maybe need more breaks in this conversation because I have to put a lot of effort into it. That to me speaks like what you're trying to share there.
And I think here's where I think you may know that you're making the progress. And this may be a bit of a benchmark. And let me tell you a little bit of a story. A number of years ago, when I was a division manager, I had about 10, 12 people reporting directly to me. I had our HR person come in to do a workshop on the different styles, that we've been talking about. And in the course of the workshop, she asked the people in the room, what style do you think John is? And there were some people put up their hands and said, well, he's an analytical. Why is he an analytical? Well, because he's always providing our numbers for us, our sales numbers, giving us the stats, showing us where we are on the leaderboards. These are all sales terms. Somebody else put up their hand and said, well, he's amiable. Why is he amiable? Because he's always talking about how we're working together as a team to accomplish our goals. And the point she ended up making was, the amiables were the ones that said John's an amiable. It was the analyticals that were saying John's analytical. Because of where does authenticity show up? It shows up with the individuals you're working with. So it's not, I think it's not for me to say that, it's for the other people who are viewing you and I to say that.
Mm-hmm. And how powerful that they see in you the bits that they see in themselves first.
And that's because that's where you're making those connections, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where you're making those connections with people. And so you want to be in those spaces as best you can. Now, one of the funny things happens, and it happens all the time. I will get somebody in a workshop say, well, I don't have time to figure this out. And I said, here's my words of hope. My words of hope for you are, if you consciously practice this, and I give them just a little tip on how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
If you consciously practice this over time, it will become automatic for you. And so I say, if you and I were to meet a year from now and we're having a conversation and you were talking about a situation you were in, and I stopped you and said, I'm curious about why you did that way, or why did you say that to that person? You'll end up having to re-engineer it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you figured out, you're already doing it automatically. Oh, that person's a driver. That means I have to do X, Y, Z. Well, this person's enable, so they need this.
Mm-hmm.
So over time it will, but again, going back to something you said earlier, it's a conscious effort that you practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, you had mentioned that there's a real quick way to determine how to identify, and I know we've talked about the different neighborhoods and stuff, but what is the way that you would help them to determine this really quickly?
Okay, so there's 2 dimensions, and if you're a DISC follower, you'll understand this.
Mm-hmm.
There's what we call the assertiveness. Now, I think of this in terms of tell and ask. How a person is either tell assertive or ask assertive. So think of it in terms of, do they say things in a telling way or an asking way? Do they move fast or think fast? Do they tend to move slower or think slower? Where are they on that scale? Mm-hmm. So if I was to ask you, Tammy, think somebody in your mind's eye right now, the conversation you had with them the last time, did they say things to you in a telling way, or did they say things to you in an asking way? Did they say things fast or loud or quiet?
Oh, can they be telling and quiet? I'm thinking nonverbal behaviors,
Yeah. Well, they can.
I'm going to say
right?
Telling, though. They were definitely
telling. Okay. The second dimension is emotions, responsiveness. Mm-hmm. Do they control their emotion, or do they show their emotion? And again, it's a sliding scale.
Yeah, I would say control.
They control their emotion. So again, if you think of body language, they're probably more relaxed. They probably they talk about tasks and things rather than people. Okay. So you said tell and you said control. Mm-hmm. That's the neighborhood right there. That's all right. That's a driving neighborhood. That's the D neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So all you have to do is draw this little cross, TACE. And now you've got a basic idea of where they are.
Mm-hmm. It's fantastic.
And that's why I love this model. It's not getting into the nuance, right? We're not getting into the weeds. We know if you get into it deeper, you can subdivide those quads and everything else, but we're not doing that. We're just saying basically that's where that person is. So that person, they're about results. It's about getting things done.
And what I love about that is it's contextual, right? So I'm thinking, depending on who you're with, what the conversation's about, how much of a priority it is, you're going to see these people shift through it, and it helps you kind of readjust then your approach. If you can quickly go, oh, they're no longer in the D quadrant, they've shifted over into the S quadrant, and I can now adjust.
That's right, exactly.
That is beautiful.
Yeah,
beautiful.
That's the down and dirty version.
Yeah, well, you know what? We need down and dirty for this. Now, you have given us a lot of really great information, some really good lines for leaders to adopt. I love the one that you talked about when you put the ball cap on. This is what my leadership role requires of me right now. Like, this is my visual reminder that I have a responsibility and a purpose here. And you talked about the platinum rule, the 4 levels to that, about self, others. I thought it was the third one.
Well, knowing yourself, how to handle yourself, control yourself, knowing others, and doing something for others. Yeah.
Yes, I missed the second one then. Yes. And now I want to talk about this free resource that you're sharing with us. I mean, of course, we also talked about the 4 quadrants. There's so much in this little interview that we've packed in here, but you're going to offer a copy of your ebook.
Yeah. When I started my work back in 2015, when I decided to go out on my own, I decided I'd start writing a blog post. And over time, so I had all this content. So I thought, well, let me put this in the form of an ebook. So it's on soft skills. It's basically, what are these things called soft skills, and how do they, and communication, the communication piece we've been talking about mostly today, and behavior is a big piece of that. And self-awareness is another soft skill that we need to develop. And so I have this ebook, and all people have to do is go to my website, johnkWhitehead.ca.
Yeah, we'll have the links here for everybody.
Yeah, just go to that, and the pop-up will come up. It says sign up for my blog. And you sign up for my blog, you get a free ebook.
Fantastic. I think there's going to be a lot of gold in there too. I don't have to say I think. I know there's going to be a lot of gold in there. I mean, you just gave us so much information in this session. I truly thank you for joining us. Is there anything you want to share that I haven't asked, and leave our leaders with one last parting gift?
No, I think here's the thing. It's a journey. And I think you mentioned this at the beginning too, Tammy. It's a journey. It never ends. One of the keys to being a leader, an extraordinary leader, is to be continuously learning. So I just challenge everybody just to keep continuously learning. Do it, participating in things and projects like this. Keep learning.
Yeah, take those opportunities for self-awareness and keep growing.
Yeah.
Love it. Thank you so much, John.
You're welcome.